remember anything else. I remember you, I remember Saad, I remember Zamzam, I remember Noura. There are certain people that I could just never uh, feel that uh, feel that I can at all forget. Okay, here we go. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. So we are still on the marriage contract. And of course, let me just go over the marriage contracts really quick in order for us to, I guess, see exactly where we're at and what we actually mean by marriage contract and all of these different areas. So we were talking about marriage contract. Hold on, let's open this one up and really see what we're talking about. Hold on, I need to share the screen. I know I'm not sharing it. So here we go. Let's share this screen and then let you see exactly the plan of what we're doing. Okay, so we did talk about engagement and the ruling in regards to engagement. And now we went into a new topic basically in regards to fiqh of marriage, which is marriage contracts. And we said that in order to have a marriage contract, that we actually needed a couple things to be within the marriage contract. And we said we needed number one, which is the offer and the consent. And we said the offer, we're not talking about an offer, meaning a person right there, here's this. No, we're talking about doing the setting. So in Islam, we don't have something like the Catholics or the Christians or the Jews would have, but we would have, it's a very simple thing where the wali is making a clear statement that he is getting his daughter or the wali, basically his muwakkila or the person that he's guardian for, getting married to this other person who is, of course, a halal person for her to get married to. And he just basically says, I agree. So that's basically it. I mean, if you were to say a marriage contract, it just really just takes less than a minute. زوجتك بنتي, and the other guy says قبلت. We've got the two witnesses right there already present, and we basically are looking into these two people, or whether the wali, whether the girl, we're looking at all those conditions. So once this happens, زوجتك, and he says قبلت, and the girl is really consenting, the two witnesses are there, this is an actual marriage. Okay, this is an actual marriage. It just happened, and it literally just took less than a minute. Okay, so there's no specific ritual to be done. And even if the Fatiha was not read, and even if the papers were not signed, all of that basically is an additional process to basically make sure that the woman, that the children, that the man's rights are all in place. Okay, so even if you wanted to do a prenuptial agreement, well, good for you, but you don't have to. And even if you basically didn't want to do a marriage license, well, not that I encourage you not to, but where if you're talking about marriage, this is an actual marriage. Okay, so we said the offer and the consent, and we talked about the different things that relate to it, and we also talked about the witnessing and the wali as well, and we went in details with the wali. But here's the thing, is that we still really had a lot to say in regards to each and every single one of these conditions, which is what we're going to be talking about, inshallah, in the coming weeks. So when we talk about number one, we talked about the wali, and we said, one, what is a wali? Well, that was the question. And we defined a wali, and we said that the wali is not exclusive to a woman, but anybody that needs this type of support. And then we went into the differences of opinions in regards to the wali being present. And we also laid out the Hanafi madhab. And we said that the wali in the Hanafi madhab is not necessarily supposed to be present per se within the marriage contract, but the wali does have the right to object. In other words, he should be informed, and he should be having the legal right to object in cases that this person is not basically qualified for this particular girl. Okay. And we said that the Hanafis had expanded the areas of objection within the area of qualification in order to make sure that this marriage was going to be in the interest of the girl. And we also said that the whole wali idea is not at all as a tashrif, but is a taklif. So it's not necessarily of something that is of an honor, but it is of a responsibility that the wali understands that he's got the responsibility to check the background for this person that is proposing or this person that the girl's getting married to. So one, check the background. Two, make sure that in case things don't work out, that he would be there to give her the necessary support, to advocate for her, to direct her, to give her advice, to be basically the advisory for her, and make sure that she is not left alone when things go wrong. So that's what a wali is for. And we also said the wali is not exclusive to women, but the wali can be in cases even for men when they may have, let's call it a disability, or let's call it also a weakness or vulnerability to misuse certain potentials. So whether we're speaking about using a certain potential, such as wandering money, they had the money, but then they have lack of money management, or they may have certain potentials, maybe their own selves, they just don't know how to control their anger, etc. Then in that situation, we basically need to, let's say, control the person's potentials to make sure that this person's decision making is basically in their favor, in their interest, and not necessarily wandered in the wrong area. So therefore, we would have a wali. Whether we're speaking about a person that has, let's say, the lack of ability to control oneself in terms of financial issues, or whether we're speaking about a person with a mental disability. And in that situation, we would have the wali slash guardian to basically be the person to support this person, to be the advisor, to basically oversee the situation that this person is in, to make sure that whether decision making, whether we're talking about potentials, whether we're speaking about of course, their life, everything that relates to their life is basically channeled towards their interest and towards what would be beneficial to them. So that's what the wali, we said, there is a default wali position that was assigned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which basically is the father. If the father basically is not present, then we would talk about perhaps the grandfather, and or is it the paternal uncle? Maternal family, maternal uncles could never be the wali. Just a note, let's say this one again, because many people would come in and say, well, can my maternal uncle? I know in general that we usually are closer to our maternal families than our paternal families, and perhaps maybe because mothers are usually more social, they usually relate us to their families more, and we end up becoming, I guess, in a relationship with our maternal side than our paternal side. I mean, that's not necessarily true for everybody. I know it's not necessarily true for me, but most people are closer to their maternal side than paternal side. Regardless, the maternal side, or at least the maternal uncles, they cannot be the wali whatsoever. Yet, if, let's say, the paternal side are not present and the girl did not have any wali, but the maternal side, the qadi might just really, out of honor for the maternal side, probably give him maybe the honor to say zawajtuka binti or such and such, really just out of honor, but the true person is really doing this whole tazweej, or this whole marriage, is basically going to be the qadi himself. So whenever there is a wali that is not present, and let's say no wali is capable of taking over, and they were not capable of doing something like a power of attorney, then in that situation, the qadi himself, the judge himself, that basically is assigned in that position, will be the person to take over, because the Prophet ﷺ had said, "As-sultan waliyu man la waliya lah." What is a sultan? We said a sultan is not necessarily this person that has a turban on his head with a little cute jewel on the top of the turban. No, this isn't necessarily a sultan. A sultan is the person that was assigned by either, let's say, the board or by the government. So in other words, a body of people that basically oversee the qualifications that this person is qualified to be a qadi. Okay, so this is extremely important to make sure that we understand what the wali is for. We also went in certain details about the wali, and mainly about does the PowerPoint have a pink? No, the PowerPoint is blue. Do you see blue on top? Let me see what you guys are seeing. Are you seeing what I'm presenting right here? Do you see what is a wali on top? Is that what you see? See what you're saying. Yeah, you should be seeing what is a wali on top, and it has a blue decoration. So you should, yeah, okay. So we're seeing the same thing. Okay. Just making sure, because some people are, she said a link. So yeah, there is this one. No, there isn't a hyperlink. This is just telling me that there is a misspelling, because yeah, it's an Arabic word. It's not okay. All right. And we also went in details with the different evidences to basically discuss the different evidences for the Hanafi madhab, because this is a very common question that people would send me. So I wanted to present exactly the madhab Hanafi and their quote from their own books, to basically make it easy for us to understand, because I do recognize that this can be a place of confusion. Yet, this is where we left off at, which is called adl al-wali. Let me explain what adl al-wali is. So when a wali, we said that his position is taklif and not tashrif. What is taklif? Taklif basically means it's a responsibility, and not necessarily tashrif, in other words, an honor. It's not a position of honor. So it's not something where, yeah, it's because, the patriarchal system is making this guy basically take over a woman's right, and that she would not have the right to make her own decisions, because these patriarchal guys are right there forcing her into an unwanted marriage and blah, blah, blah. No, this is not what it is. In fact, there is what the Quran calls as adl wali, which is when a wali may be taking advantage of his position, or taking advantage of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him, and then probably is acting not in favor of the girl, but perhaps acting in his own favor, or perhaps maybe, let's say, exaggerating his authoritative position, and then perhaps dismissing the girl's rights, and coming in and saying, well, this isn't in my interest, and this is what my wali is trying to do, and here's how I want to object, and here's how I want to save myself from this wali perhaps trespassing his limit, and all of these different things. So in case of adl al-wali, this is called adl al-wali. In case of adl al-wali, the qadi will look into the situation. So what does that mean? The qadi will look into the matter, will look into the objection that the daughter is coming in with, and then the qadi will also do a hearing for the wali and say, okay, can you state your reasons? How do you support the reasons why you're objecting to this person? So The madhab Hanafi, remember all those women that are coming forth and saying, hey, madhab Hanafi allows me to get married without a wali and all of that. Well, wait a minute. It's so sad that many times people, they would talk about a certain madhab, but then they don't really understand the whole madhab, and they end up cherry picking from those madhab, and they end up making these silly mistakes. So even if you were to say the madhab Hanafi expanded the reasons to what and how the wali can object. The wali can object to let's say the choices that this woman is making. So in other words, the madhab Hanafi, they would say, well, there could be reasons like tribe. He doesn't come from the same tribe that we come from, perhaps even color, race, height. Are those necessarily things that somebody can object a wali for? Here's one thing. The madhab Hanafi in particular, let me just focus on the madhab Hanafi for a bit. They actually went and discussed 14 different issues, and I will say them really quick because we're going to go over those later on. 14 different issues, and from those, let's say even progeny or perhaps piety. But when I say piety, then they branch out on what is actually considered as part of piety. We're not just talking about this person praying or not, but they could be talking about something like, well, he smokes, or he eats on the street, or perhaps he doesn't say his dhikr often, or he doesn't attend the masjid enough, or whatever, things like that. Or number 3, perhaps things like wealth or social status. Now that's a tricky one when you say social status. So she's a person that I guess comes from a bourgeoisie position and social status. She's a rich woman. She's the son of some kind of a family that has a huge lineage of doctors and engineers and blah 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 and all these different people. And that guy is just any random person. So the father comes in, wait a minute, we're all doctors, we're all engineers, we're all rich people. Here, my daughter right now, this guy, yeah, okay, he's got good deen, but my daughter is actually getting married to this person that is probably just working at a pizza delivery place, or perhaps making the minimum wage, to these employees that don't necessarily have a certain degree. And no, this doesn't suit our social status. The madhab Hanafi will actually accept such an objection. The other madhab will say, sorry, we won't actually accept that because it's enough for people to be equal in their piety and in their akhlaq, and that's all that matters. But the madhab Hanafi, they expanded the areas of objection to include things like social status, to include things like money status as well, to include things like education or even job. Hey, my daughter is a doctor. I can't get my daughter married to a customer care representative. Guess what? The madhab Hanafi will say, you know what, Dad, I can see where you're coming from. And that's really important, because if we don't understand how al-madhab al-Hanafi basically supported their objection, how they had supported their objection to why the wali shouldn't necessarily be present. They didn't say that the wali was going to be curtailed from any type of involvement, but they actually expanded his area. From a different area, they expanded his area, and that's why they said موقوف على إجازة الولي. So here's the problem, is that many people, they would read these selected quotes and not really understand the rest in how the whole physics and how the math issue within that madhab basically works out. We're going to get to all the different 14 issues that the Hanafi madhab basically considered as an area that the wali has the right to object on. Just wanted you to see that. Okay, so what if we're looking at things like tribe, color, race, height, weight, etc.? Is that acceptable in any madhab that a wali can simply say, well, yeah, we're white, they are black, or they are, I've had Somali parents actually come to me literally and say, our daughter wants to get married to this guy. And I was like, okay, well, what's wrong with this guy? They said he was a Jared. That's the word that they use, which basically is the N word. This is how they Somalis translated it for me. It's like, wait a minute, what? Right, basically the N word right there.
That's not true. Oh my goodness.
This is just, despicable to actually see within a society. Um, Within a society actually seen this way. But guess what? This is not unprecedented. This is not unprecedented, by the way. You did have some scholars, it didn't necessarily have a madhab, okay, but you did have some scholars that actually said that and considered that a white woman should not marry a black man or a black man shouldn't marry a white woman. Not that it was a madhab that other scholars adhered to, but this was mentioned in some books of fiqh. Why am I even mentioning it in? Because I wanted you to recognize that not everything that is in the books of fiqh is necessarily something that other scholars would endorse. Only an opinion that other scholars had endorsed and other scholars approved of. And that's why it's good to actually learn the madhahib, because the madhahib, think of it as a whole committee and a whole organization of scholars that are overseeing each other's work to make sure that it basically fits fits the Quran and Sunnah and all of that is supported. So you're seeing a group. That's why I like the madhahib part, because that there's a whole organization of scholars to make sure that we're overseeing each other's work and not bring about some random opinions. But there are some scholars that didn't necessarily adhere to it, like I said, a specific madhab, but you had some scholars actually say that yes, and they went in details, things like, well, a Arabi woman is a noble woman and therefore she could not marry a Persian man. Of course, at the time, Persians were the ones that were considered at least closest to the society that was learning fiqh. Okay, nothing against Persians, but I'm just letting you know that there's this type of racism and this type of I guess influence from the different political slash tribal slash I guess cultural influences that did sometimes influence how we read fiqh and how we understand qualification and all of these different details. So it wasn't necessarily just that, but you also had, yeah, if she's a woman that is Qurashi, from the Qurashi tribe, that she should not be marrying somebody that is not from a Qurashi tribe. And therefore, we need to make sure that that tribe is pure and all of that. There's really no evidence to back this up. And, just mentioning that one. But what about things like height? This guy is 6'4", and when we see, of course, studies say that women prefer taller guys than shorter guys, and of course guys that appear fit, and same thing with the guys, they appear to like girls that are slim, girls that more of a taller and a certain guess body feature, etc. So that's the same thing when you were to look at these certain features. They tend to be basically sending a signal to the brain that this is just at least the right perhaps the right qualification, the right quality for mating and protecting my babies and all of that, regardless of all these different theories out there, evolutionist theory or whatever you want to call it. At the end of the day, is that can there be an somebody that probably looks at height or weight and say, well, the reason why I'm objecting to this is because this person, hey, our girls are at the 6 feet height in height, and this man is 5'2", and the father basically objecting that, no, we're not going to have that. Okay. But here's one thing. I never heard a scholar really, even those that are considered shududat, really speak about height being a problem. But I did hear of weight, but not necessarily height. But can we have a scholar necessarily say, well, the father can object to height, for example? Okay. Now, one thing is that all scholars agreed that if they had both consented, the wali consented, the daughter consented, and basically all the other conditions in regards to this marriage contract are basically met, that would make a valid marriage contract. Okay, that would make regardless of the differences in height, weight, I guess social status or tribe or whatever it is, regardless of all of that, if they're both consenting, then this is a valid marriage contract. There's no question about that. It would be a valid marriage contract if they just both consent and that's it. But when would this be an issue? Whenever there rises a dispute. And that's when the scholars would then get into how they would rate this dispute and whether they think it's a valid dispute or not. Okay, so most of the times they would not regard it as part of the khuluq, but they would regard it as part of the khalq. But that doesn't mean that every single thing that is in appearance is necessarily going to be as a trivial thing. No, appearance itself can sometimes be an area of objection, perhaps from the father, and then in that situation, we would see the qadi would be the one to make the final judgment. You know, the Beauty and the Beast? So the wali would basically be, or the qadi would basically be the final judge in whether the wali's objection is valid or not. The other time that adl al-wali can happen is when the woman is married. Okay, so this woman is married, but then the wali, let's say, gets involved, and this woman is complaining from her husband, and they get into this dispute. She involves her family, and then the wali gets involved and says, you know what, we're getting a divorce. That's it. He's not respecting you. He's not honoring you. He hit you multiple times. That's it. We're going to end this marriage, and basically insist that he wants to end it. But the girl is saying, you know what, I still want to give my husband a chance. I still want to deprive all the different ways that perhaps may make my marriage work, and I don't want to obey my wali. Is this adl wali? It sure is. Let's say the wali is insisting that, no, you're not going back to him. This guy is not respecting you. He's not honoring you. You don't know your rights. You don't know how to honor yourself. And say the wali is insisting that, no, I want you to stay here, and I'm going to figure this out, and we're going to end this. The wali does not have the right to do that. The wali is, in other words, is acting outside of his area of let's say the area of jurisdiction. So once he acts out of his area of jurisdiction, that's when she would have the right at least to disagree with the wali in that on that issue, because the wali acted outside of the area of his jurisdiction. Okay, so where do we get that from? So we have that from the ayah. We're going to see that ayah in just a bit, and we also have a story to this, but I know that people connect to the stories more, and let's see the story in Sahih al-Bukhari. So Maqil ibn Yasar, he prevented his sister from going back to her husband after divorcing her. And even though she had finished her waiting period, so mind you, her waiting period finished, but she still insisted that she wants to go back to her husband. This isn't after getting divorced 3 times. Because if it is getting after divorce 3 times, then in that situation, she cannot go back to her husband until she marries someone else without prior agreement. Okay, so this basically just happens, I guess, without prior agreement, etc. But then she gets married to this third person, or this other person, and then, or second person actually, gets married to the second person after the third divorce happening. And then I guess the second marriage doesn't work out, and then she gets divorced. That's when she can go back to her husband. Okay, but anyhow, I guess this woman, her Maqil ibn Yasar, who was her brother, remember the brother can be a wali. Okay, the brother can be a wali if the father is not present. If the father is not present, the grandfather is not present, the paternal uncles are not present, then in that situation, the brother becomes the wali. All right, the brother becomes the wali. Think of it as he becomes responsible. Okay, well, then her ex-husband, he basically came back to her asking for her hand in marriage, but her brother insisted that he cannot marry her. And then the ayah, here comes the ayah. وَلَا تَعْضُلُوهُنَّ أَن يَنكِحْنَ أَزْوَاجَهُنَّ. The ayah said, well, do not prevent the women from going back to their husbands if they basically in أَرَدْنَ تَحَصُّنًا, if they seek a relationship that is within the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And don't prevent them from going back to their husbands is basically what that ayah is saying. The Prophet ﷺ then called onto her brother and asked him to get them married to each other. In other words, that basically curtailed Maqar ibn Yasar's jurisdiction and his authority to let him know that he acted outside of his area of jurisdiction, and that the girl or the woman has the right to basically make the decision. Now, the preponderant on the wali, the preponderant ruling on the wali that we can see from the ayah, from the hadith, that the wali is actually obligatory to have on all women. So whether she is a thayyib / a woman that had a marriage experience before, or whether she is a bikr, which basically means virgin, never had a marriage experience before. And virgin there's a dispute between scholars whether a virgin is only a person that had a marriage experience before, or whether if, let's say, she loses her hymen due to maybe horseback riding, or maybe heavy menstrual bleeding, or perhaps maybe, let's just say, a child that basically, well, I don't want to say a child, but a teenager that basically just did the wrong move, etc. All these different things. Does that make her not be a virgin or not? Okay, and I don't want to go into the details of, well, what is the ruling on all that correction that they would do and all that for the hymen. Don't want to get into that one right now, but later on I'll discuss it, inshallah. So the hadith is saying, أيما امرأة نكحت بغير إذن وليها فنكاحها باطل باطل باطل. Any woman that gets married without the consent of her wali, then her marriage is batil, is invalid, basically telling us that when he says any woman, the hadith basically was left comprehensive and did not specify whether this is speaking about a woman that had a marriage experience before, whether that's an older woman, or whether that's a woman with a PhD or a woman with no PhD, or whether we're talking about a 13-year-old. It basically said any woman. It did not necessarily specify. So when we're speaking about the wali, those that had said that no wali is basically needed, let's just see what the other scholars they responded. They said, well, the ayah says, وَإِذَا طَلَّقْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ فَبَلَغْنَ أَجَلَهُنَّ فَلَا تَعْضُلُوهُنَّ. Said, well, the ayah was ordering the walis not to take advantage over the woman, and the response was, this was referring to taking the advantage, but it was still directing the responsibility at the wali. And they also depended on non-authentic. Okay, well, that one basically said لا يصح لامرأة أن تنكح إلا بإذن وليها أو ذي الرأي من أهلها أو السلطان. No woman can get married without the permission from her wali's permission, or the permission from a qualified person from her family, or the judge. So that's basically another hadith. And certainly, when you're looking at all these different evidences, they also depended on an authentic hadith. الأيم أحق بنفسها من وليها والبكر تستأذن في نفسها وإذنها صماتها. Now here's one thing. You could see that the ones that said that the wali is not necessarily supposed to be there, they depended on these evidences. They said, well, here it is. When it says لا يصح امرأة أن تنكح إلا بإذن وليها أو ذي الرأي من أهلها, he said لا يصح لامرأة. So he was basically giving the authority to a woman, and therefore the evidence that the ones that said that they no wali is needed, they said, well, here we go. As long as she basically has an opinion and a supporting decision maker and advocate right there to help her make the right decisions. But at the end, they said that it was giving her the authority. And let's see, they said we've got another evidence that a woman is basically a non-virgin woman is more responsible for herself than her wali. And the virgin is asked about herself, and her silence is the answer. And they said, well, they said that here's our evidence. He said that a woman is basically the one to be the first responsible person over herself and the person in authority, and even over her own wali. And of course, the response to that is that it doesn't contradict the hadith that obligate. So even if we were to look at these three evidence that, hey, look, we've got these hadith, even though I'll tell you one thing, just on a side. These hadith, there's lots of dispute in regard to their authenticity. Okay, lots of dispute regarding their authenticity. The other thing I must admit is that even when you debate their authenticity, the Hanafis are not silent to support and even bring backed up evidence in terms of those hadith. So, but they're like I said, even if we wanted to say those hadith are weak and etc., but we would basically have other evidence. We would have other evidence to basically come to this conclusion that yes, these hadith are there, but that doesn't contradict the other hadith that mandated a wali. Okay, so therefore, this is not neglecting the wali, but this is, for example, right there, it's basically saying, well, I need her consent. This is to make sure that the wali is not trespassing his authority or abusing his power or authority, but that this is within her interest. This is making sure that she is consenting to this, and all of that is needed. So that does not whatsoever negate that the wali is necessary, but this is basically making sure that the wali is acting on behalf of the girl's interest, and that, of course, those ahadith do not necessarily contradict the need for wali, okay, or itself. Can a woman consummate the marriage herself? Although majority of scholars do say that a wali is obligatory, this question, of course, is speaking about whether a woman can issue the offer. Remember when we said the wali would come in and actually say zawajtuka binti, for example? So the question is, can the woman say zawajtuka nafsi? The wali is there, present, and he's watching all of this getting conducted. And she says, zawajtuka nafsi. And then the guy says, qabilt. The wali is there. It's not that the wali was unaware of this whole thing. No, he was actually there. So majority of the scholars, they said that women cannot start the offer during a marriage contract. The only ones that considered that this is permissible is basically the Hanafi madhab. But that definitely is not to mean that the Hanafis do not consider that there's a need of wali. So if a woman was with this guy and we had two witnesses, okay, and another guy was, I guess, right there, somehow he's, let's say an imam at the masjid, okay, and then this woman is with this guy, and she says, "Zawajtuka nafsi," and the guy says, "Qabilt," and these two witnesses, they're really happy about it. They're clapping and it's congratulations. And then this man and this woman go to a hotel. Seriously? That's an invalid marriage contract. That's an invalid marriage contract. That's a joke. That is a joke. And this is what's happening many times today. And they would think that, yeah, I've got Hanafi madhab saying this. Are you serious? Hanafi madhab says that you would conduct it in this way, and that wali has no idea, no wedding was done, nothing. And then you would basically go in this way. This is nothing but zina with عليها شهود, like we say. It's zina wa alayha shuhud. It's basically zina, and we've got witnesses to witness that. Allah al-musta'an. Hanafi madhab and wali clarified, just to make sure. Abu Hanifa does not say that the marriage without a wali is permissible, but he considers it mawquf. What does that mawquf? Mawquf meaning it would not be consummated until basically the wali approves and says, okay, yeah, go on, and it basically approves it. The Hanafis, therefore, they have widened the qualifications in a groom, and therefore had given the wali the right to void the marriage if the groom is not qualified. So we're talking about the Hanafi. They would say we'll need to look into the ethnicity, the progeny, Islam, freedom, wealth, piety, occupation. So you would say that they basically went into more areas, and we will see that in just a bit. So that's what we're going to talk about in the following slide, which basically goes into discussing qualifications. So if you set the qualifications were supposed to be in these matters that you had mentioned, so how do we understand these areas of qualification and all of those that the Hanafi madhab had regarded? So that's the following slide. Qualifications in marriage. How do we understand it? How do we put it within the context of today? How do we, consider that this is a qualification that we should be discussing, or whether it's not even a qualification? Of course, most girls, they just think, I would say, based on the surface and a very shallow interpretation of the hadith, they would say, إذا جاءكم من ترضون دينه وخلقه فزوجوه, therefore لا تفعلوا تكن فتنة في الأرض وفساد عريض, or فساد كبير. That the Prophet ﷺ basically said, if you get a proposal of a person that basically has the piety and the mannerisms, then you should get them married. And if you do not do so, then the result is going to be destruction, or is going to be basically corruption within the society on people's akhlaq. But here's the thing. So does that mean if, let's say, you have all these qualifications, or at least, let's say, these things that many men would want to look for, does that mean that, yeah, I just have to accept because this person, yeah, he's a religious person, has good akhlaq when we had asked about him, but unfortunately he doesn't have a good job? Does that mean I'm not supposed to accept, or am I supposed to accept? Am I forced to accept based on this hadith, or how do we understand this? One thing is that we would often see is a myopic interpretation for the deen. What do we mean by that? So, and many times they would get into this type of misunderstanding that they would take one text and leave the other text and end up really being confused about understanding the deen. And they would say, okay, well, look at you, you're confusing, you're making this too narrow. So that's why you would need the scholars to help you make sure you're making the right interpretation, and by going to the right data, and let's say valid data. And even though
sometimes it may seem contradictory, but that data and understanding that data and the circumstances and how to apply that data is crucial to making sure that you're understanding Islam right. Because if you don't collect the different data, if you don't have all that data, Quran, Hadith, all of that, and all the scholars and how they explained it, then what you're going to be doing, you're going to be basically selective. And certainly by being selective, you're going to misunderstand the religion. It's going to be exactly like somebody reading فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ and not continuing the ayah because they just read one portion of it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, woe unto those that pray. Well, you didn't continue the ayah. You just were basically taking one portion of it and you didn't continue الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. You didn't continue that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was referring to those that are negligent over their prayers, those that would pray one and skip four, or etc. So you know that. Okay, now in general, for successful marriage, it's very important to have certain compatibility. So when you say compatibility, you're talking about that both the wife or the groom and the bride, that they're compatible in a number of different areas in order to basically have a successful relationship which involves basically communication, good understanding, and certainly expectations. This is extremely important. Expectations even for the future and how things would go. So when you look at these areas, usually, you would have the experts say, well, age, compatibility is important, education, culture, profession, piety. We don't disagree on that, but there are a number of things to say in regards to that. Do you always need to consider age? How much of an age gap are we talking about? How much of an education does really the education reflect, let's say, wisdom, maturity? What does education and what do these degrees really reflect? Culture. What if a person is from culture A and person is from culture B? Is that okay for me to refuse because he doesn't come from my culture? What does that look like? Profession. She basically is holding a certain profession, which certainly deemed by the society as a profession that basically deserves a lot of respect because it brings in a lot more money, and certainly generating money is going to generate a certain authority within the society. So when you speak about money, you just don't speak about money as, yeah, I can buy whatever I want. But no, this is actually talking about the different privileges that you would also be able to unlock even within the society. So when you look at profession, you're also talking about money. That's basically in the back end. And you're also talking about social status that also affects how we see a profession. People definitely give more respect to doctors than perhaps teachers. And even though, this one has their own education and that one has their own education, etc., but definitely when you look at doctors, you see, one, they get more income, two, they get more privileges because they have more income, and three, they definitely do end up studying way more, not necessarily always, but they definitely had invested a lot of studying and a lot of social abandonment to get to where they are. Okay, but we could also say the same in regards to teachers. Hey, they got involved in the society and within the society, but just because the society doesn't see it as necessarily something that deserves all the respect, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are to disregard it. So then how are we going to say that? Piety. How much of piety are we talking about? Are we talking about a person that appears like a religious person? A person, I don't know, wears a turban, probably a thobe, has a long beard, or perhaps, stays at the masjid. Everybody knows him. He's always giving the khutbahs at the masjid. Is that what you mean by piety? Or a woman wears a niqab, mashallah, every day when you talk to her, she says, mashallah, she's doing great with her, mashallah, with her, alhamdulillah, just doing extra, perfect with all that, mashallah, alhamdulillah, and everything. You know what? And she'll even put some Arabic words in there, I'm doing great on that. But that's not actually what makes piety. Thank you for putting these nice words right there, catches right there, alhamdulillah, mashallah, and all of these different things, but piety is more than that. So how do we understand that? Okay. And certainly piety it's so easy to go on the pulpit and just, hey, right now you can actually ask ChatGPT to give you khutbah al-Jumu'ah, and yeah, they'll write it for you in a beautiful khutbah if you ask me, and ChatGPT will write it for you. You can say, hey, I want it to be this long, I want it to be this short, or you can go to aluka.net or aluka.org and also get some great lectures there, and you could just stand on the pulpit right there and just read it. Okay. Just read it. You could read a couple times and practice on it. And it'll be just the perfect khutbah. It doesn't necessarily mean that you had given it, you didn't write it, but you just read it. So just like you could read it in front of the classroom, you can probably read it on the pulpit as well. And if you are afraid of being in public and afraid of people looking at you, you can just always look at the microphone instead. Does that necessarily make you a person of piety? Well, not necessarily. Okay, people differ. Okay, okay, my son is asking me, he just asked me a random question right now. Why do Malaysians carry a stick with them in the khutbah? For the Shafi'i madhab, he just asked me that one, so let me just answer it really quick. For the Shafi'i madhab, part of the etiquettes of delivering khutbah al-Jumu'ah is that you carry a stick, a cane, because the Prophet ﷺ himself used to carry a cane during khutbah al-Jumu'ah. They basically took it as the Prophet ﷺ did it, and therefore it's a sunnah, therefore we're going to do the same. All right, let's see. People differ in different characteristics. So we're talking about certainly, what you really want is calmness. You want dialogue. You want somebody that listens, listens before talking. That's a dialogue. Mutual respect. That usually is the ideal marriage. But how do we get there? It's so easy to talk about it in theory that, hey, where everybody's calm, we're dialoguing, he says one thing, I object to it, and we're just really cool about it, and we've got mutual respect. But then here's one thing that we always have to keep in mind. Just because he probably maybe asked you, I don't know, make a cup of coffee, and then she comes from a different culture and she says, I'm not going to make you a cup of coffee. And he says, no, I want you to make me a cup of coffee. And of course, when you look at it, I mean, it's just a cup of coffee. What's the big idea? No, he is asking for a cup of coffee basically for the service. Okay. But she, on the other hand, is understanding that this isn't asking for a cup of coffee as much as it is trying to be authoritative and basically disrespecting that, I guess, ego of hers, or disrespecting her honor and all of that. So then what we usually see in dispute, it would be really silly if you were a marriage counselor and you were just looking at the surface of that dispute. You would say dispute 1, 2, 3, 4, and then think of and focus on the dispute and say, well, what's wrong with this one? What's wrong with that one? What many times, and especially men, sorry men, but you really fail at communication. Men fail at communication, and sorry ladies, but you fail too. Let me explain how. Men fail at expressing what they want, and so do women. Women, they know what they want. She knows that what she wants is, I guess, attraction. She wants somebody that can see her, validate her, somebody that can be caring, etc. And she'll say things, she'll get angry because he didn't get her a flower. And he will be confused. I mean, what's the big idea? I just came in and I don't know. She's just giving me a long face. She's angry, but I don't even know why she's angry. So she's angry, goes into her room, closes her door, and basically the bedroom door, and is crying. The guy is right there having all these question marks over his head. He's completely confused. Oh, so what just happened? Why is she crying? I didn't do anything. And she would just say, yeah, you don't even care about me. You don't do this. And he's all confused. What, don't care about you? I just came back from work and here I am. Hello, honey, I'm home. And you just get angry. But she basically was expecting that he had known that today was their anniversary or her birthday, or probably, I don't know, that it was a special day for her and she wanted a flower or expected him to, I don't know, surprise her with a flower or surprise her with a cake or whatever. And he's all confused. Men, on the other hand, they're pretty direct. This is what I want, and this is what I expect. That's basically it. Women, they don't express what they want, but they know exactly what they want. They know exactly what they want, but they don't want to say it. They expect you to know it. They expect you to just have a sense and an intuition to figure it out. And that's why they would say, no one understands me. No one understands you. Perhaps you might want to be more articulate over what you really want to say. And it's not that no one understands you. It's that you are giving all these hidden signals and think that people are supposed to somehow magically understand what these hidden signals are supposed to be meaning. Maybe you can be articulate about it and they say exactly what you want, rather than a hidden signal and actually that. At the same time, men actually do the same thing in different ways, because they would perhaps sometimes ask for one particular thing, and a woman's objection to a man is probably, yeah, I guess she's trying to cancel out, he'll say, or she's trying to challenge my masculinity, my authority, my manhood, and all of that. And then they'll basically misunderstand it, when what she was really trying to say is that, can you please say it in a nicer way? Yeah. So, of course, all of these different things, we would say it is more of a utopian, I guess, image of what a successful marriage looks like. There's calmness, everybody's dialoguing, there's mutual respect. And of course, ladies, let me just say one thing. Successful marriages are not born successful. They're not born successful. There's a lot of compromise. There's a lot of communication. There's a lot of listening. Once we see listening, that's when you will see better communication. This is extremely important. Keep this one in mind. The first thing that starts functioning in you, certainly your heart, when you are first created in your mother's womb, your heart is already pumping, even when you're 6 weeks, just barely the size of perhaps maybe an Egyptian rice, or maybe a basmati rice. Okay. And not the long grain ones too. But your heart is pumping. But guess what else develops after that? Just a short time after that. Certainly your brain, certainly different things develop, but one very important thing, before your hands and before all these different things, before even your eyes would start functioning, it's your ears. Your ears start functioning, and you're capable of hearing the world around you, even though you have no relationship with it yet. But you do have a relationship with it, at least through hearing it. That's basically to let us know. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in regards to Ashab al-Kahf, ضربنا على آذانهم في الكهف سنين عددا. In order to separate them from the rest of the world, the first thing that he had done was basically close on their ears. And the last thing to function basically in your body, according to the Prophet ﷺ, was actually your ears as well. So that's why when a person is buried, the Prophet ﷺ said he would hear the sound of their footsteps departing the place. So that's to let us know that the first and the most important thing to make a communication, to make a relationship with the world, or even exiting the world, is actually listening. And that's the same thing when you deal with teenagers. The most important thing that you want to do with children, teenagers, etc., marriage, etc., is always take the time to listen. It's so important to lecture, sure, and talk to them and tell them what they should be doing. But you also have to not forget that listening. And yes, even if they were your own children, you know what? Just remember, Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam listened to this 5-year-old kid, Yusuf alayhi salam, in his dream and what he had to say. It was just a dream. You would not think that a 5-year-old in his dream were something of any important or containing any importance for me to listen to it. But Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam listened to this young child basically tell us a dream. He didn't take of it as a fantasy, but he regarded it as a ru'ya. So yes, even a child that young may have a ru'ya. So if they can have a ru'ya, which we already know is nothing but some whole probably chemical things or probably an inspiration, maybe in happening while they were asleep, why shouldn't we listen to their ru'ya or their vision or what they say when they're awake? Taking the time to listen is basically creating mutual respect. People just want to be heard. Give them the time to speak, give them the time to be heard, give them the time to basically create that relationship and let that mutual respect. That mutual respect actually comes from when you give that other person the feeling that I had heard what you said. Thanks. I'm not going to obey. I'm not going to take it. But at least I heard it, the husband can say. I heard your opinion. Thank you for sharing. But here's why I'm going to object to it. And here's what I think. And then the wife, as long as it's not haram, that, he, or maybe his defense is probably to her is not making sense. At the end of the day, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold him accountable. And therefore, the implication for the decision-making that he had done, he would be the one to be responsible for it. Now, qualifications in Islam. Of course, if the man is equivalent to the woman, there's no problem with that. Or if the woman is equivalent, but the scholars actually discuss this, not necessarily whether the woman is equivalent to the man, but they actually discuss this in the whole debate on making sure that we have somebody that is equivalent to the woman. So this whole debate is really in defense and in support of women and not the other way around. It's in support of women and not the other way around. So let's say scholars discuss things like piety, freedom, job, and certainly considered those basically related to the culture as well. And how do we understand all of these things put together? But some scholars actually regarded that, no, it's exclusive to piety, job, wealth, and freedom and ethnicity. So what did majority of the scholars consider? They said, well, if the piety is there and the job is there, and this person, they are equivalent in job and basically wealth. In other words, wealth is going to speak of social status and freedom. What do you mean by freedom? So what do you mean by freedom? We're talking about freedom in terms of that he is basically not a slave if she is not a slave. And if she is a slave, that he can be a slave. But if she is a slave and he is not a slave, then there's no question that, that he's considered as the upper hand if he's not a slave. But then they'll question whether this is a person that is equivalent to her if he had a history of being a slave or if he is a slave. Okay, so this is in regards to slavery. Ethnicity, then they debated what would make, and there's a whole debate on what do we mean by ethnicity? Are we talking about Arabi? Are we talking about Persian? Are we talking about those kinds? Or are we talking about even further tribes? This is, I don't know, this tribe, and this is Qurashi tribe, and this one is Shammar, and that one is Anizi, and that one is I don't know, and that one is I don't know, all these different tribes that can be out there. Okay. Is this what we're talking about? And the other question is, who is the person that basically determines which tribe is better? Is there such a thing as a Arab is a better tribe? For the Darud, they'll consider themselves as better than the Hawiyah. And for the Hawiyah, they'll consider themselves even more manly than the Darud. And the list goes on and on. And the same thing if you were to talk about Anizi. You look at Anizi, they'll consider themselves, hey, we're the upper people, and people like al-Kandarino, they're not even close to us. And the list goes on and on. You go, same thing if you were to go to Saudi Arabia, the ones that are probably Qahtan, they'll definitely see Zahrani as a different area. And similarly, if you were to go to Palestine, a person that's from Khalil, they'll see themselves as basically an upper place, and Abu Snene will see themselves as different, and the list goes on and on. Same thing if you were to even go farther. I'll tell you a funny thing about al-Khalil since we opened that one up. Okay, so there's an area, okay, in Khalil is a mountainous area, and then you had the upper area, the upper part of the mountain. They basically had created, let's say, infrastructure because they simply had a connection with the Palestinian Authority. So the upper area basically had better infrastructure than the lower area. And then right now, you would see that there's this racism between each other. One, they'll consider themselves from the upper area, we're the high class, and you were the lower class. And then they would not get their daughters married to, the upper class and the lower class, etc. And then they created their own division and not realize, well, wait a minute. Remember, this wasn't too long ago. This was just in 1996 that the government was paying for that area, but we really belong to the same society. Anyhow, so when you look at ethnicity, then they would go into this debate. Who is going to be really judging what's an upper ethnicity and what's a lower ethnicity? And are people supposed to be speaking even about such a thing? Is there such a thing as an upper ethnicity and a lower ethnicity? How do we understand that? So we're going to talk about that, inshallah. When, of course, scholars speak of marriage qualifications, they discuss, like I said, who suits the woman and not who suits the man. So this whole debate is really in support of women. This whole debate is really in support of making sure that this person is compatible to this woman. So it's taking in consideration her status, whether we're speaking about religious status, the job, the wealth, the ethnicity. So taking in consideration all these different areas. So that's why they would even discuss it. Now, here's the question. If we're talking about, these qualifications, are they obligatory? Well, no, they're not obligatory to have, but some scholars do consider that it's a condition in a valid marriage contract. Okay, so if you're saying it's not obligatory, then why would you say it's a condition? We would just say the marriage itself is obligatory, but we would look, according to some scholars, they would say, well, wait a minute, there's no compatibility here. Do we really want to move forward with this marriage contract? Or are we looking at a failed marriage? What are we doing here? So that's when the qadi may get involved and say, okay, dear, I'm seeing that you are, you're bringing in this much money, and this person is, with all the respect to all those that would work in all jobs, but this person you're making $50 an hour, and this guy that you're getting married to is making $12 per hour. Are you really going to accept this marriage? Do you see how this is going to be a complex issue in the future in how you would relate to one another, and how you would make family, and how you would make your priorities and your decision making? Do you see how and where this is going to go to, etc.? So, the qadi might just bring it to her attention, but she could say, that's okay. I understand. I understand that money doesn't buy happiness. And I understand that at the end of the day, I am making more, but I still want to move forward. And what if the wali objects? Then the Hanafis will say, yeah, you know what? I see what you're saying, Mr. Wali. And because she is definitely not compatible in terms of job, and in terms of income, and in terms of social status, sorry, my dear Dr. whatever, Dr. X. Okay. I guess Elon Musk is going to be happy about that one. Dr. X. Okay, whatever. I can see what you're saying. And yes, we're not going to have this marriage contract. Let's say she makes an appeal. But this time she doesn't go to a Hanafi court. She basically decides to go to a non-Hanafi court. She decides to go to a Shafi'i court. The Shafi'i court will say, you know what? As long as you are consenting to this, and yes, he's got piety. Is he religious? Yeah, he's religious. MashaAllah, he's basically very mu'min. Very mu'min. I've got my evidence to prove that he's a mu'min man. Okay, what about his akhlaq? Everybody praises his akhlaq. He's good and the best in his akhlaq. So why is your dad objecting? Oh, because he's basically not making the kind of income that I'm making. Yeah, well, at a Shafi'i court, thanks for coming. We will let this marriage get validated, and we will let it pass. Congratulations. That's the court. Okay, just want you to see all of this. Okay, some scholars, of course, looking at the Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanbali, they'll regard that no, we're going to conduct that, because they considered that it's not a condition, and that as long as there's mutual consent, and unless this person exposes his lack of mannerisms in public, that's the only time that we're going to take it in serious consideration. So, okay, what do you mean fajr? What is al-fajr? Al-fajr is basically a person that does sin. But we're not just talking about any kind of sin. No, we're talking about a person that exposes their sin and does it publicly. He's right there openly talking about, or even behaving. He's basically walking with his girlfriend and basically happy that he has Melissa as his girlfriend, and he's got pictures on Facebook and all of that. That's Melissa, his girlfriend. And that he still has a relationship, or probably drinks or goes to the bar or whatever it is, or probably smokes all that weed and all of that. No, that's a fajr person. Puts it on Facebook, or probably Snap or Snapchat or whatever it is, and all the TikTok is what they have today. So at the end of the day, that's fajr. Brief. Scholars have 3 different opinions in regards to, well, how do we define qualification? One, is it considered obligatory? So the first opinion basically said it's only considered in religion and piety. In other words, when we're talking about what's considered as a condition that would invalidate the marriage if it's not there, is if we're talking about religion and piety. So if this person, let's say he comes to the sheikh and he basically says that he's Muslim. Yeah, I did the shahada. But then he says that he belongs to this cult, and this cult basically believes in all religions. I don't know how, but yeah, that he belongs to this cult, and this cult is a kufri cult or a shirki cult. Then in that situation, that shahada is nullified right on the spot. Just because he said the shahada, that doesn't necessarily make him a Muslim, because that shahada right there just basically got nullified by belonging to this kufri cult. So therefore, it would be considered a condition even if she consented. What if she says, but you know what? It's okay. I'm okay with this cult that he is part of. I mean, I'm a person that is very inclusive and all of that stuff. We're going to say, sorry, dear, but that's an invalid marriage contract, period. Because this person belongs to this cult. Simple as that. But he did his shahada and he was praying at the masjid. Yes, even if you prayed at the masjid, this person, not until you recognize La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. You have to negate all the other gods, all the other different paths, whether we're speaking about aqidah or whether we're speaking about legislature, and then say illallah, and then basically approve or at least embrace Islam. You would first have to negate all the different cults, all the different religions, all the different paths, whether in legislature or whether we're speaking about in aqidah. Okay. So if this person nullified his deed, well, the marriage contract would get nullified itself, even if the wali approves it, and even if she approves it. And the second one, that it depends on mutual agreement. Well, does that mean if there's a mutual agreement, does that mean that the second opinion says there's mutual agreement, she accepted that he comes from a different cult? No scholar ever said that if this person is considered a kafir, that if, as long as there's mutual agreement, that we're going to accept that. No scholar whatsoever said that. And the other thing, it's part of what validates a contract. So we're speaking about piety. It's part of what validates a contract. I would say more if it's a futile disagreement and debate, because they all really agree on the sides of the condition that if this person is not fully Muslim, that the marriage contract is invalid. They all agreed on that. They all agreed that if this person is not fully Muslim, that this marriage contract is invalid. Okay. All right, let's continue right there. And what if, let's see, those that say it's only considered in religiosity and in piety. So some scholars, the majority of the scholars, they actually said, well, the conditions that are important are really exclusive to having religiosity and piety. Okay, what's the difference between religiosity and piety? Religiosity, we're talking about this person is Muslim. This person is taking their religion and their religious practices seriously, at least the basics of it. Piety goes farther. Piety, this person is willing to give up on halal things just to avoid these things, basically lead them to the wrong area. So for example, they're giving up on, let's say, certain games, or they're giving up on certain things that may be halal, maybe their own job. It's halal. But because this job involves dealing with women frequently, let's say working at, let's say customer care representative. Let's just say it that way. But then in this area, many women were coming in, let's say, okay, but this man happens to be on the side of attractive side, and the women that would come in are not necessarily looking for, let's say, a customer care representative as much as they are there to look for another type of a care representative. They're coming there to flirt with him. And he noticed that, hey, me being in that position, this is fitna to me, fitna to other women, and therefore a person of piety would say, you know, I don't belong in that position. I'm going to quit the job. Even though the fatwa is that a customer care representative is not haram, but he recognized that this was a fitna to him, and the position that he holds is basically a fitna, and therefore wanted to give up on it. Now, that's piety. Piety is recognizing, even when something is halal, recognizing that it's leading you to haram, or at least to a threshold of haram. Okay, so majority of the scholars, they said, well, piety and religiosity is basically what would make as an enough qualification for two to get married, and their evidence is that, hey, Abdurrahman ibn Auf got his sister married to Bilal ibn Rabah. And even though Abdurrahman ibn Auf was considered, hey, Qurashi, he was considered from a very noble and an upper class, at least social status. And Bilal ibn Rabah was an ex-slave. So in other words, his sister was an ex-slave too. In other words, he basically comes from a completely different social group. But then he got his sister married to her. And they said, well, here's our evidence that as long as this person has piety, that's all that matters. And all the other qualifications don't matter unless there's, well, if there's mutual consent, that's all that matters. Now, those that considered that is based on mutual consent depended on the following evidence. Let's see, not only did Abdurrahman ibn Auf get his sister, what did we say? Not only did Abdurrahman ibn Auf get his sister married to Bilal ibn Rabah, but of course, what did I actually confuse that before? I think I confused that before. Abdurrahman ibn Auf got his sister married to Bilal ibn Rabah, not Bilal ibn Rabah's sister married Abdurrahman ibn Auf. I think I said it the other way around before. So no, it's Abdurrahman ibn Auf basically got his sister married to Bilal ibn Rabah. Okay, I think I confused that before. Okay. Those that considered that it's based on mutual consent, they depended on the following evidence. Number one is that they said marriage in general is based on mutual consent, and which basically includes these qualifications. So in other words, if they both accept it and they are both interested, that's all that matters, regardless of all those different conditions, basically, that we may put here and there. That's for them to examine, for them to basically investigate, and for them to see whether this suits them or not. And certainly, when we're speaking about qualifications, they differ based on culture, environment, and it's left for the people to set its place and set where all of this dynamic and how it falls within the society and the implication of it and whether they approve of it or not. So in certain areas, it's probably the job that basically makes a person be an upper status. In other areas, it's an appearance that makes a person upper status or lower status. In other places, it's probably maybe the money that they're making. Other third places, it's probably the family that he comes from that makes the person's social status, or at least the person being an upper class or a lower class or whatever privileges they would be getting. And of course, they said that at least the least Islam was considered was piety. All the rest is left for people to basically explore, investigate, and seek basically on their own to see whether they approve of it or not. And this is really important to keep in mind. You know, one thing I'll give you, it's a little off, but I'll still mention it. You know, when you look at Sahabiya that came to the Prophet ﷺ, and she said, she told the Prophet ﷺ that 3 people had come to ask for her hand in marriage, and she had said Mu'awiyah Abi Sufyan, she said Usama ibn Zayd, and she said Abu Jahl. Now the Prophet ﷺ had instructed her to take Usama ibn Zayd, and the reason for that is that he objected to Mu'awiyah Abi Sufyan. He said that he was su'lukun la mala lah, he was too poor. And then in regards to Abu Jahm, he basically objected, and he said la yada'u asahu an atiqihi, he doesn't put his stick down, which is an idiom to actually say that he's an abusive husband. He is a man that is constantly beating his wives, beating his women, and therefore not the right fit and not the right person that would be a good a good match for you. So the question that rises, why didn't the Prophet ﷺ, if he had known that about Abu Jahl, why didn't he get involved and basically say, you know what, since you don't put your stick down, we're gonna let others not put their stick down, from your sides and basically beat you up since you're beating women. Why didn't he do that? Here's one thing that we have to keep in mind, is that the Prophet ﷺ was letting us learn that sometimes you just have to let people on their own just basically figure out their lives, and you don't necessarily have to get involved in each and every single thing that you disagree with. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ definitely had shown his clear objection that of domestic violence, and a clear objection, and that's why he recommended that woman not to get married to Abu Jahl, right? But at the same time, it doesn't mean that he was going to get involved and say, okay, since we already know that about you, we're going to get involved and we're going to right there basically probably beat you up in the same way. And that's the same thing. When you look at the government, it doesn't go into people's homes and just making sure that everything's going fine, and not unless somebody makes the call and here's 911 and here's this is what I'm going through. That's basically reaching out to the government to get involved. But you as a government, you don't get involved unless you're asked to do so. Unless we're speaking about another type of objection or another type of a situation where it involves a public offense, then in that situation, that's a completely different thing. Okay, so when you say we're talking about, okay, all the rest is left for people to seek and consider, and that's the same thing, is that Islam didn't necessarily get involved in each and every single thing, and basically left for that society to determine whether this is something that they would approve for their daughters or not, whether this is something right or not. Of course, you've got different cultures, and cultures, we shouldn't be dismissing cultures. This is very common that people would think, and certainly in a society that liberal society, Western society, culture is usually seen as backwards, but that's not actually right, because cultures, it basically is involving a number of different practices, a number of different experiences, a number of different dynamics that helped that community basically come to a certain settlement, come to a certain communication, come to a certain way that doesn't involve necessarily verbal communication, but we could just understand it and understand it without even talking about it. We just know that this needs to be there. We just basically developed some sort of, let's say, an uncommunicated communication. It's not said verbally, but we recognize it, and it becomes a way to relate to one another without even needing to talk about it. And this is a type of maturity. This is a type of maturity. When you recognize the world around you, you recognize the people around you, you recognize a social dynamic, you recognize a communication that is not necessarily articulated, that's a type of maturity. That's a different level of maturity. So culture is, let's call it, as a level of a mature communication and mature way in showing experiences and organizing a group of people's relationship with one another. Culture is not necessarily backward. It's mature. It is a development. But once the culture goes beyond the limit of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had considered as a valid culture, or a culture that is, let's say, a communication that serves people's rights and serves people's let's call it interest, then if it goes beyond that, then that's going to be a rejected culture, and that's going to be called jahiliyyah. Okay, so what is Islam against? Islam is against considering other qualifications over piety. So if you're looking at, yeah, this person is a doctor, but then he doesn't even pray. This person has great money, billionaire, but he doesn't even know where the Qibla is, doesn't even pray, then that's what Islam is telling you. Listen, you had really confused your areas of reading your priorities. Islam tells you that we want you to consider piety, religiosity as number one, and not think of the other things that they could override basically the more important qualifications. That the most important qualification is piety, and the other qualifications are basically secondary that definitely are important, but it does not whatsoever override religion, does not override piety. Now, of course, mutual equivalency in qualifications is left for people to consider in general, and marriages based on mutual consent, which includes these qualifications. Qualifications, they differ in culture, like we had said earlier, and at the end of the day is that you would say that this hadith. Let's look at this hadith. The wife of Thabit ibn Qais ibn Shammas. Now you want to remember Thabit, he had a loud voice, but his wife came to the Prophet ﷺ, and she basically said, I don't complain of Thabit in his behavior or piety. So in other words, of course, after all, the Prophet ﷺ, remember, he actually said about Thabit ibn Qais, when he had this loud voice and this ayah was revealed, لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي ولا تجهروا له بالقول كجهر بعضكم لبعض أن تحبط أعمالكم وأنتم لا تشعرون. Thabit ibn Qais stayed in his home because he thought that this ayah, which was directing the Sahaba to have a type of respect and a high respect for the Prophet ﷺ, he thought that that ayah was directed at him. And that basically isn't necessarily true. In fact, it's not true. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet ﷺ had basically said, call him for this, Thabit is Thabitun fil Jannah. Thabit is steadfast in Jannah. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ then, well, for this woman, even though this man had the best akhlaq and best deen, but when she came to the Prophet ﷺ and basically objected that he's got great deen, he's got great akhlaq, but what was her objection? Her objection, I would hate to become as a kafir behavior after being Muslim. Because she understood that the responsibility of a Muslim wife is to be of a high level in obedience to the husband and recognizing the husband as well, that she recognized that if she is not capable of seeing that, she was recognizing that that would basically make her at the level of a mannerisms of a kafira, because a Muslim woman was supposed to be obedient to the husband. A Muslim woman was supposed to be good to the husband. And therefore, if she is not practicing that, she said, I would hate to be a kafira after being Muslim. Okay. So then the Prophet ﷺ tells her, will you return his garden to him? So what do you mean, will you return? Well, that was her mahr. And she said, yes. The Prophet ﷺ then accepted that she would return her garden, which was her mahr, and basically divorce her once. And in another, well, actually, there are multiple narrations, not just one. Some narrations said her objection was his height. Other narrations, they said it was his nose. Other narrations, they basically said that she complained of not feeling a sense of masculinity, whatever that meant. At the end of the day, is that it is clear and obvious in her words that this man was actually good in his deen, good in his akhlaq, and that was not necessarily something that she would object to. Let's see in another narration. Habiba bint Sahl was married to Thabit ibn Qais, and he was an ugly man. She said, if it wasn't for fearing Allah when he had come to me, I would have spit in his face. Okay. That's basically another hadith. A virgin woman came to the Prophet ﷺ, complained that her father got her married to a man she hated. And in fact, the objection was, she said that her father was getting her married to his nephew, and because she said, he was elevating or trying to somehow elevate his sissiness. So what are we looking at? You know, khasisa is like he's a lower man, he's not manly enough, and he's acting like a girl or whatever it is, or something like that. And, you know, he wasn't of a person that would be recognized for his masculinity, and he wants me to get married to him. It's like, here I am, I'm supposed to be correcting it for him. I'm supposed to be disciplining him. Right now, I'm supposed to be working on bringing this manly behavior in him. I don't want this kind of man. And of course, we know the hadith, so I'm not going to get into that. And that woman basically changed to her position later on and accepted what her father had recommended. And she basically said, that, well, here I said triviality. No, I would actually, disagree with this translation. The Prophet ﷺ basically then gave her the full power of attorney to herself. And she said, I had given my consent to what my father had done, but I wanted women to know that their fathers do not have the right to force them into that marriage. Fatima bint Qais, we talked about this hadith, so we're going to skip it. Preponderant, there's no contradiction between saying that these qualifications are based on mutual agreement or that they are to be there in a valid marriage contract. People's lives change. It's left for them to look for what makes a more successful and a more compatible life, or at least comfortable life for them. So in a society that probably where legal status or probably perhaps legal documentation is important, yes, the father can object, sorry, but he doesn't have the papers or the legal documents to basically ensure that she's going to be safe living here, for example. Or perhaps maybe say, I'm sorry, but he's not making enough money, or I'm sorry, he's not fit, because he is on the area of probably coming from a certain culture, coming from a certain group of people. So in the end, it's left for them to basically determine what makes a better compatibility. People have different habits and behaviors, so therefore be inclusive to how people see things. The other thing is that lifestyles change and people may require new things based on the situations and the dynamics that change. In the end, if both sides agree on each other, that's the most important thing that matters. A wali's rejection will be evaluated by the judge or the court to make sure that this wali is basically taking consideration of the girl's interests and not something that is against her own interest and benefit. Majority of the scholars do not give the woman the right to personally choose and get married by herself, and gave the woman the right to object the marriage if her wali takes advantage of her. Therefore, no marriage can take place without her consent. She can choose the person she's interested in and get married through her wali. If the wali rejects, the reason is researched, evaluated. If the reason is valid, the contract will not take place. If the reason is not valid, the judge will have the marriage done despite the wali's disapproval. Now, this is enough for Adl al-Wali and speaking about that. And inshallah, we will continue. But if there are any questions right now, tomorrow, we're going to be continuing this portion of the qualifications and a little bit more to say. But inshallah, we'll also be talking about the witnesses. Do we have to have a wedding what can the wedding, I mean, what kind of a wedding are we talking about? What should the wedding have? And of course, different things about the wedding, and inshallah, we'll get to discuss that. Any questions before we sign off for today, inshallah? No questions? Oh, someone wrote it in the chat. Okay, that's fair enough.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Go ahead, dear. You can unmute yourself.
Yes, I had a question. So what would be the ruling for a woman that has already, say, gotten, for example, married to a man without the wali, and she, for example, she did not know the correct ruling, or she may have went with the Hanafi madhab, for example, and she didn't know of, the correct ruling that she didn't have to have a wali.
So fair enough. That's a very fair question. First of all, the first thing that we need to do is for her to go to the nearest Islamic court or the nearest scholar, and basically take it from there, and then decide how and what they want to do. And mostly what they're going to do is, if the wali was not involved, we're going to contact the wali and say, listen, this is what had happened. Do you approve? And we're going to reinstate basically the marriage contract, basically. Okay.
Okay, so if she had children, for example, during that period, so those children are considered legitimate?
So, like I said, I would basically just say, go to the court. I don't want to confuse the people listening to this. Going to the court is going to be necessary to make sure that the qadi would give the final fatwa on this, because of course we're speaking about right there, why did she not contact the wali? Was the wali not present? Who was the qadi? What was the qadi? And all of these different circumstances. I don't want to give just a general fatwa, especially that we have different madhahib. Okay. And how far did this go? Was the wali informed? Was he not informed? Even for the Hanafi madhab, did he know about this? Did he not know? What does this look like? So we may need to reach out to the wali and before we make the final statement on whether this was a valid or an invalid marriage contract.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, that makes sense. One more question, if you don't mind, inshallah. So what is the age of consent for a woman in terms of marriage? For example, like if a young girl is, what's the exact age, or is menstruation the kind of the legal, that makes her the legal?
Okay. So in general, Islam doesn't necessarily put a specific number, a specific number to say this is the age of puberty or this is the age of maturity. Islam basically lets us know that there is a physical development that you would see. But the physical development isn't enough, because you could have a 7-year-old get her period, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she's mature. Maybe perhaps her body developed and is ready to conceive. So once you reach the age of puberty, that's another way of saying, hey, you are capable of reproducing one of your own, whether it's a female or a male. That's what puberty basically means. You're capable of being a father or you're capable of being a mother. Okay. But just because a person is capable of reproducing and bringing one of their own, that doesn't necessarily mean that this person is mature enough to give consent to a matter that is in their favor or is not in their favor. That's why we would have a wali. Now, is there a specific age? Right now, if you were to look at the books of fiqh, they wouldn't necessarily have an age, but in the different Sharia courts in different countries, there are Sharia courts for family courts. They may have a certain age. They would fluctuate between 14, 15, 12, 13. So even in the US, for example, if you were to look at family court in New Hampshire, you could actually get married at the age of 12. At one point in America, in certain states, it was the age of 9. And in right now, you would say most states would have it until at the age of 16, considering that 16 for the girl, okay, and 18 for the boy. So at the end is that you could see some of those numbers really fluctuating due to, one, perhaps the society, sometimes I would say political pressure from feminist movements or perhaps different groups, different agendas as well, trying to bring the age of marriage up for a number of different reasons, okay? But certainly it's not necessarily to make happier families, because they are opening the door for relations outside of marriage. So it's not necessarily to make better children, but no, it's actually to open doors for more promiscuity. And this is extremely important just to keep in mind. So in Islam, it's not necessarily a specific age, but if you are within a certain country, I would look into that Islamic court, if it's in a Muslim country, and actually see the numbers that are based on that court, which number that, or which madhab they had considered as the legal age for marriage for boys and girls.
Jazakallah khairan.
وإياكم. Any other questions before we sign off, inshallah? Okay, here's a question. Where is it? Hold on, let me get to the question. Does the wali need to be practicing? What if the wali doesn't pray or fast or uphold any waliya duties upon the woman? Okay, fair enough. So if the wali is Muslim, then the scholars disputed in regards to prayer. If he does not pray, is he still Muslim or not? Us, the Hanbalis, they regarded that no, that basically nullifies his deed. The majority of the scholars regarded that just because somebody is not adhering to the faith, that doesn't necessarily take away his jurisdiction. So just because somebody is not practicing, that doesn't necessarily take away his legal right in being responsible. Okay, so that's the same thing. If let's say this father is not practicing, does that mean we're going to say we don't need your child support? Absolutely not. We need you to pay child support, regardless of whether you pray or you don't pray. And that's the same thing. We're not saying that wali is an honorable position. And that's the premise. If we were to look at that as an honorable position, then we're going to say, oh, well, he's not practicing, therefore we don't. No, this is a responsibility. This is taklif, not tashrif. So therefore, as a person of responsibility, regardless of his religious commitment, he's still going to be responsible. He's going to be responsible, and he needs to hold his responsibility in the position where it basically is taking consideration the daughter's interest, that her basically her benefit and so forth, regardless of his religious commitment. Religious commitment does not nullify his responsibility to be a wali. So I hope I answered that one. Okay. All right, so this is it, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. We will see you all, inshallah, tomorrow, because we've got a lot to continue. And subhanallah, maybe it should have actually been Saturday and Sunday, or when